Wyoming, 1894. A land where the wind doesn't just blow, it screams. The Chugwater Valley carried the scent of dry sage and the ghost of rain that never fell. For most men, this valley was a graveyard of broken dreams and forgotten hopes. The panic of 1893 had swept through the West like a scythe of God. Silver had collapsed. Banks had folded overnight. Ranches were abandoned to the wolves and the weeds. The Miller place was the worst of the wreckage. 300 acres of choking dust, a house with a rotting porch, fences that had long ago surrendered to the gravity of neglect. But Elias Thorne saw something else. He stood at the edge of the property on a Tuesday in April. He was 34 years old. His hands were a map of 15 years of brutal labor. He had worked cattle trails and ranches from the Rio Grande almost to the Canadian border. He had saved every nickel. He had skipped 1,000 meals. He had mended his own boots until the leather was more thread than hide. $400. That was the price of the freedom he had spent half his life earning. The bank clerk took the money without a smile. Elias didn't mind.
He didn't need a smile. He needed a home. The first week was a war against the past. He cleared the debris from the yard with his bare hands. He hauled away the rusted remains of machinery that would never turn again. The house was a shell. At night, he slept on the hard floor. He could hear the coyotes laughing in the dark coulees. He didn't feel lonely. For the first time in his life, he was standing on his own dirt. By the second week, he started on the fences. The image of a man working alone is a quiet one. But there is a thunder in the silence of a man with a purpose. Elias dug the post holes by hand. The Wyoming soil was stubborn. It was packed with stones and the ghosts of old winters. He was setting a corner post when he heard the rhythm of a horse. It wasn't a workhorse. The gait was too light. The sound was too refined for this wasteland. He didn't look up immediately. A man in the West learns to finish his stroke before he greets the world. He tamped the dirt down around the cedar post. Then he wiped the sweat from his brow with a gloved hand. She was sitting on a mahogany bay.
The horse was worth more than his entire ranch. The woman was even more striking. She wore a deep blue riding habit that spoke of St. Louis tailors. A bright red shawl was draped over her shoulders. It was a splash of blood against the pale, unforgiving sky. She looked as though the dust had no right to touch her, yet she sat her saddle with the ease of someone born to rule the plains. "You're the one who bought it," she said. Her voice wasn't arrogant, it was tired. It was the voice of a woman who had spent too much time in rooms with high ceilings and no heart. "Elias Thorne," he said. He didn't take off his hat. The sun was too sharp for manners. "Clara Sterling," she replied. Elias knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the Sterlings. Silas Sterling owned the Crown S to the north, 5,000 head of cattle, a house made of stone imported from the east. Clara was the only daughter, the lonely princess of the plains, the locals called her. "My father says you'll be gone by the first blizzard," Clara said. She looked at the sagging barn.
She looked at the empty, thirsty fields. "Your father is a man of many opinions," Elias said. He picked up his shovel. "He wants this land, Mr. Thorne. He had his chance to buy it." "He wanted the price to drop lower," she admitted. "He likes to wait until a thing is dead before he picks the bones." Elias looked her in the eyes. They were a startling, honest gray. "This land isn't dead," Elias said. "It's just resting." Clara didn't move her horse. She watched him for a long time. She saw the way he handled the tools. There was no anger in his movements. There was only a steady, rhythmic purpose. "I've lived here my whole life," she said softly, "and I've never seen anyone look at this valley with hope before."
She turned her horse and rode away without another word. Elias watched the red shawl disappear over the ridge. He didn't know it yet. But the fence wasn't the only thing he was building. He was building a challenge to the gods of wealth. Silas Sterling did not like to lose.
The millionaire rancher arrived 3 days later. He didn't come alone. 2 of his foremen rode behind him. They didn't look like cowboys. They looked like hired guns. Silas was a big man with a white mustache and eyes like frozen pond water. "Thorn," Silas barked from his saddle. Elias was sharpening an axe. He didn't stop. The rhythmic scrape of stone against steel was the only sound. "I'll give you 500 for the deed," Silas said. "You make $100 profit for doing nothing." "I've already done something," Elias said. "I've decided to stay." Silas laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound that rattled in his chest. "This is a rich man's country now, Thorn. The open range is closing. The Johnson County War showed what happens to little men who stand in the way. You need capital to survive the droughts. You're a flea on a dog's back." "Then let me be a flea," Elias said. He stood up. He was lean, but his muscles were like braided cable. "But I'm a flea that owns 300 acres of Wyoming." Silas leaned forward. The friendliness was gone. "My daughter has been seen riding this way. Keep your eyes on your work and off my family. If you want to keep her away, give her a reason to stay home," Elias replied. The tension was thick enough to choke a horse. One of the foremen moved his hand toward his belt. Elias didn't flinch. He just held the axe. Silas signaled his men to move out. "The winter will do my work for me," Silas shouted back. But Clara didn't stay away. She came back the next Tuesday, and the Thursday after that. She didn't bring money. She brought stories. She sat on the porch rail while Elias mended the roof. She told him about her mother, a woman from Virginia who hated the wind, a woman who had died of a broken heart in a stone house. "My father thinks things can replace people," Clara said. She was looking at her hands. "He thinks if he owns the whole valley, he won't be alone." Elias stopped hammering. "And what do you think, Miss Clara?" "I think I'd rather have a garden in a desert than a palace in a void." She looked up at him. "Why are you doing this, Elias? You could work for the railroad. You could have an easy life in Cheyenne." Elias sat on the edge of the roof. "My father was a sharecropper," he said. "He died without owning the dirt under his fingernails. I promised him I'd find a piece of the world that didn't belong to a bank. Even if it's a broken piece?" "Especially if it's broken," Elias said. "It means I'm the only one who knows how to fix it." In that moment, something shifted. The millionaire's daughter didn't see a humble cowboy. She saw a king of his own making. She reached into her saddlebag. She pulled out a small bundle wrapped in silk. It was a collection of heirloom seeds. "My mother saved these," she said. Her voice trembled. "They're for a life that hasn't started yet. Delphiniums, marigolds, and wild roses." She handed them to him. Their fingers touched. It was a brief contact, but it felt like a lightning strike in a dry forest. Elias looked at the seeds. They were tiny, fragile, just like his hope. The town of Chugwater began to talk. The scandal of the cattle baron's daughter visiting the dirt farmer spread. People whispered at the general store. They speculated at the saloon over cheap whiskey. Some said Elias was a fortune hunter. Others said Clara was losing her mind. But the women of the valley saw it differently. They saw a woman who was finally breathing. They saw a man who wasn't afraid of the Sterlings. Before we continue with this journey of the heart, I have a small favor to ask. If you are enjoying this story of the Old West and the strength of the human spirit, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps us bring more of these forgotten tales to life. And tell me in the comments, do you believe a person's character is built by what they own or what they are willing to lose? I truly enjoy reading your thoughts in the comments. Now, back to the Broken Oak Ranch. The summer of 1894 was a cruel one.
The heat was a physical weight. The creeks began to shrink into muddy ribbons. Silas Sterling saw an opportunity to crush his neighbor. He owned the water rights to the upper stream.
He built a dam. He diverted the water to his own vast pastures. Elias's small herd of 10 cows began to suffer. His garden, grown from Clara's seeds, began to wither. The green shoots turned yellow, then brown. It was a move meant to break a man's spirit. Elias didn't complain. He didn't go to town to beg for justice that wouldn't come. Every night, he hauled buckets of water from a deep, slow-moving well by hand. He walked miles in the dark. He was exhausting himself to keep the dream alive. His ribs began to show through his skin. His eyes became hollow. Clara found out. She confronted her father in the great stone house. "You're killing his animals, Papa," she screamed. "I'm exercising my legal rights," Silas said. He didn't look up from his ledger. "If he can't protect his stock, he shouldn't be a rancher." "You are a cruel man." "I'm a successful man," he countered. "There is no room for sentiment in the West." Clara did something that night she had never dared. She waited until the house was silent. She hitched a small supply wagon, loaded it with water barrels from the Sterling tanks, and drove through the night. When she arrived at Elias's ranch, she was covered in dust. She was trembling with exhaustion. Elias was at the well. He looked like a ghost in the moonlight. His hands were bleeding from the rope. "Clara, you shouldn't be here," he whispered. "I won't let him win," she said. She began to pour the water into the thirsty troughs. "He will disown you," Elias warned. "He already lost me," she said. "He just hasn't realized it yet." They worked together until the sun began to peek over the horizon. The cows drank until they were full. The wilting green shoots of the garden lifted their heads. "Why are you doing this for me?" Elias asked. He was standing close to her. The morning light was soft and pink. "Because you're the first thing in my life that isn't for sale," she said. Elias took her hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of a hero in a dime novel. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found his home. It was gentle, uncertain, and filled with everything neither of them had dared to say. But the peace didn't last. A week later, the sky turned a bruised, angry purple. A dry lightning storm rolled over the Laramie Mountains. In the West, lightning is a fire starter. A bolt hit a dead pine on the ridge. Within an hour, the grass was screaming in flames. The wind was blowing north, straight toward the Sterling Ranch. The Crowness had the most to lose. Thousands of acres of prime grazing land, the stone house, the massive hay barns filled with winter feed. Elias saw the smoke from his porch. He looked at his own ranch. He was safe. The wind was carrying the fire away from his 300 acres. He could sit and watch. He could watch Silas Sterling's empire burn to the ground. It would be justice. It would be the end of his enemy. He looked at the red shawl Clara had left on his chair. He thought of her mother's seeds. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his shovel and his gunny sacks. He saddled his horse. He rode into the heat. When he reached the Sterling line, it was chaos. The ranch hands were panicked. The fire was jumping the fire breaks. Silas Sterling was on the ground. He was trying to lead a frightened horse. He looked old. He looked small against the wall of orange flame. Elias jumped from his horse. He didn't ask for permission. He started beating the flames with a wet sack. He worked for 6 hours. The heat singed his hair. The smoke filled his lungs until every breath burned and every cough tasted of ash. At one point, a burning branch fell near Silas. Elias dived. He threw the older man out of the way. The branch caught Elias across the shoulder. He screamed in pain, but he didn't stop. He kept fighting. The Sterling men saw the dirt farmer risking his life. They found their courage.
They formed a line.
They held the fire at the creek. By dawn, the danger had passed. The ridge was black. The air was thick with the smell of carbon and defeat. But the crown sus was standing. Elias sat in the dirt. His shirt was ruined. His skin was blistered. Silas Sterling walked over to him. The millionaire was silent. He looked at the man who had every reason to let him burn. "Why?" Silas asked. His voice was cracked. Elias looked up. His eyes were red but steady as a mountain. "Because a man who lets his neighbor's house burn isn't a rancher," Elias said. "He's just a tenant of his own pride." Elias stood up painfully. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't wait for a thank you. He climbed onto his horse and rode back to his 300 acres. The weeks that followed were difficult. His shoulder was wrapped in heavy bandages, and he could barely lift his arm. He felt like he had lost. The fire had taken his energy.
The drought was still lingering. He heard the sound of a carriage. It wasn't a rider this time. It was the Sterling buckboard. Clara was driving. Her father was sitting beside her. They stopped at the gate Elias had built. Silas got out. He walked to the porch. He looked at the bandages on Elias's shoulder. He reached into his coat. He pulled out a legal document. "The dam is gone," Silas said. "I've signed over the permanent water rights for the creek to this property." Elias stared at the paper. "I didn't do it for the water," Elias said. "I know," Silas replied. He looked around the ranch. He saw the garden blooming against all odds. He saw the straight fence posts. "I spent 40 years building a fence to keep people out," Silas said. "My daughter told me I was building my own prison." He looked at Clara. She was smiling. Her eyes were wet with tears. "She wants to stay here, Thorne. She says the air is better on this side of the ridge." Silas looked back at Elias. "I won't give you a dowry. You wouldn't take it anyway. But I'll give you my respect. And in Wyoming, that's harder to come by than gold." Silas turned and walked back to the carriage. Clara didn't follow him. She climbed the stairs. She sat next to Elias. She took his hand. "He told me I was a fool," she whispered. "For what?" "For loving a man who works harder for his enemies than himself." "And what did you say?" "I said that's the only kind of man worth loving." They were married in the garden. The heirloom flowers were in full bloom. The delphiniums were as blue as the Wyoming sky. The townspeople came. They saw the millionaire sitting in a wooden chair on a dirt ranch. They saw the humble cowboy holding the hand of one of the most admired women in Wyoming. They saw a miracle of the frontier. The Broken Oak Ranch became the Hard S. It never became an empire. It didn't need to be. It was a place where the fences were strong and the doors were always open. Elias and Clara had 3 children. They taught them that the land is a mirror. If you treat it with greed, it will give you dust. If you treat it with love, it will give you a life. Years later, when Elias was an old man, he sat on that same porch. The Chugwater Valley was changing. The 1900s were bringing cars and wires, but the wind still smelled of sage, and the red shawl was still draped over the back of his chair. He looked at the fence line. It was still straight. It was still solid. He felt certain, just as he had on that first day. Because a humble man with a dream is more powerful than a millionaire with a grudge, and a lonely heart, once found, never wanders again. Thank you for spending this time with me on the frontier. If this story brought a tear to your eye or a smile to your face, please hit that like button. It helps our community grow. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a journey into the past. We have so many more stories of courage and love to tell. I hope to see you in the comments below.
God bless you, and keep your heart true to the trail. Coming up in our next video, we will tell the incredible story of the Silver Queen of Colorado. She was a woman who lost everything in the mines, only to find a treasure that couldn't be dug out of the earth. You won't want to miss it. Until then, this is your storyteller, signing off from the Wyoming Wind.